Oh,
Hi,
hi.
how are
Nice.
you?
I'm so good. How are you? I'm just putting my phone on Do Not Disturb. There we go.
It's
Now you
so
can
nice
hear me.
to see you again. It's been a
Yeah.
while.
Yeah. You're very small on my screen. I'm gonna see. Oh, there you are. Now you're bigger. Hi. Right?
Well, we've all been raving about your book, and we have so many questions, switching genre and the way you structured everything. But first, we just want to say welcome, and we're so glad you're here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you for being early readers.
We thoroughly enjoyed it. So I know people have questions, but we'll just start it. Can you just talk a little bit about one, switching genres, and
Sure.
two, where the ideas came up for this one? And then I'm sure we'll have a lot of follow-up questions.
Yeah. I did. I've always wanted to write adult books. That was always my intention. And I started in the young adult genre. And my first young adult book was a thriller. It was published by Houghton Mifflin. And Ellie Black was supposed to be the second book of a two-book deal in the young adult genre. And I wrote it, and my editor was like, this is not young adult. And so I hung on to it for a long time, and then I kept going back to it and revising it over and over again until it came to its current iteration. But I had always intended to write adult. I mean, I write what I read, and I read, everything from young adult to adult romance to thrillers. And I think, books are kind of a reflection of ourselves. And so, we're complicated people, and I've just always been interested in that.
Um, well, that's interesting because I was just curious because it's definitely a departure from your earlier stuff.
Yeah, yeah, it is. I think though, if you kind of look at my work, there are some common themes and trends. So, again, I started with young adult thrillers, and I moved my way through there. I did a historical Japanese fantasy in the young adult genre, and then I did YA contemporary. All of those books kind of centered around what it means to be a yellow body in America. And then my next book that came out was actually an adult book called Mika in Real Life. And
Which
that
we did as an
explored,
early read.
oh yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah, great. So it was it explored mother-daughter relationships, but it also explored a lot of intergenerational trauma. And trauma is also explored in Ellie Black. So you can kind of see where, those interests blossomed for me. I was really interested in Ellie Black exploring, victim trauma and how they overcome it, how they kind of learn to carry, grief in one hand and hope in the other.
Well, and then Chelsea also is dealing with identity issues and, um, being half Japanese. So I thought that was interesting too, and the things she encounters.
Yeah, I wanted that to be, of course, it's a continuing that exploration of what it means to be a yellow body in America. And there are just so many different ways, to be Asian American in the United States. I don't consider this book to be an identity book. It's not an exploration of her identity, but it is part of who she is. And so she does have that lens through which she views the world. So she does make comments about, her race and what she sees in the mirror and how she was treated in this small, majority white town. Which also, if you think about it, going back to Tokyo Ever After, which was a young adult book, that Azumi's character, and that was she was raised in a majority white town, as I was. So you can kind of see those things tend to like pop back up in my writing.
Well, and I loved that. And I still think about it, about what it was like for her when then she went over to Japan and everybody looked like her and how, or most people look like her and how different that was for her and trying to recalibrate. I thought that was really, and trying to find her place there. So no, I think that's great. And I think it's wonderful that you've been able to write in different genres. It seems like sometimes authors get pigeonholed. So I think it's fantastic that you've been able to explore different genres.
Yeah, there's a lot of pressure, I think, for authors to pick a lane and stay in that lane. But for me, it gets really stale. So I enjoy writing like the lighter fare, like the young adult romance novels. Those are so much fun, and I like going back to my youth and my childhood and thinking about those teenage years. But I also like writing, darker fare. And during this time when I kind of transitioned into adult fiction, I became a mother, and that's kind of been what I was thinking about. So when I wrote Mika in real life, I really wanted to explore those mother-daughter bonds, which isn't something that you can, access as easily in young adult fiction. Young adult fiction, I feel like, is a reflection of what's happening in the present moment, and adult is kind of a reflection of what has happened in the past.
Oh, that's interesting. I like that. Well, does anybody, I'm sure y'all have questions. I don't want to just be asking them all, so feel free to leap in. Anybody? Okay, Michelle, you're muted.
All right, I was so intrigued with the genre, your journey with the genre. And that to me alone was the draw, even though I loved Tokyo Ever After, I loved Mika in real life. So I started going down this rabbit hole of how does one do this successfully, kind of right out of the gate. And there was a quote from The Empress of All Seasons, and it said, "Silence is the cousin of invisibility." And there
Mhm.
was this aha moment, like, even taking away the trauma or the race or whatever, it was just all so clear to me that this thread runs through all of your novels about like the unseen and the
Mhm.
unheard. And is
Yeah.
that intentional, or is that something that your editor says, we have to keep going with this because it's really resonating with readers?
It's so funny you mentioned that because it has been very much intentional, but now that you've said that, that's very true, is that I'm actually there's a second book, companion book to Ellie Black. So we follow Chelsea Calhoun into another case. And I'm like, one of the major themes in it is language and how it's used to subjugate women. And so within that, there's that silence built in where women are encouraged to be silent and not seen. And it's been very unintentional, but I guess it comes through in the writing. That's something that I'm passionate about speaking out. I think I was encouraged when I was younger not to talk about race. I grew up with parents who became parents in the wake of the civil rights movement, and they were taught to ignore it, and that love doesn't see any color. And I really wanted and I needed to speak about my race and my identity when I was younger, and I never had that outlet. And so I think that now that I do, and I have these voices in these novels, it's something that I continue to go back to, is that, we need to speak out and we need to be loud. And women deserve to be heard. I mean, that's the top line.
Thank you.
Well,
Mhm.
in connect, I know B, you have a question, but in connection with that, the other thing that I thought was really a thread through this book was how much violence happens to women
Mhm.
when they're just living their life. Like Ellie goes just out to go to the bathroom, and then that's something she's regretted the rest of the time. And I just think that you didn't like hammer us over the head with it, but it was definitely throughout the book that there are times when little small choices we make that shouldn't be a problem at all end up, causing all sorts of violence against a woman.
Yeah, I mean, I think that speaks toward, our women's fascination with true crime. 80% of true crime readers are women. We're the demographic for it. And I think that's driven by, our survival instinct, because we're so aware that something like this might happen to us. And so, we're studying violence and how not essentially to be killed. I mean, not to be victims of these crimes. And on top of that, I think we empathize with the victims too. So we can easily imagine ourselves as them. At least I could when I was writing Ellie. I could easily imagine myself as a teenager just walking off somewhere to use the bathroom, and then you're gone.
I agree. And I think that's the part that's so scary, is that you really can envision that happening. It's not something that you're like, well, when is that going to ever happen? It happens all the time.
I think about, my teenage years, and I did a lot of stupid things when I was a teen. I think as we all did, and we look back and we wonder how we survived it. But then when I look at it through a different lens, I think, well, they weren't really stupid. They were stupid things there were things that society would think are stupid that a girl does, but they're things that a girl should be able to do that are safe.
Right.
Like go camping, with a couple of friends.
Or hiking.
Yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly.
No, I agree. You're right. We say they're stupid things, but in an ideal world, they wouldn't be at all. We ought to be able to go out and do those things. I
Exactly.
completely agree.
Mhm.
B, I know you had a question. Sorry. I just wanted, since that was kind of in line
Oh,
with
I
what
love
Michelle
it.
was
I
talking
love it.
about.
I was so engrossed in the story, and you almost made me feel like I was one of the characters, like I was in the story with these people. And I was just intrigued, and I was wondering what type of research you had to do in order to make these characters come to life the way you did.
Mhm. I did research with survivors that asked to be anonymous. I also did a lot of research with law enforcement officers. They also asked to remain anonymous, the detectives that I worked with. But I was able to get, a sense of the logistical side of police work and the physical and emotional toll it takes, especially. I was really struck by that when interviewing these detectives. I interviewed a detective in Vancouver, and he worked in the sex crimes unit, and they're on a 4-month rotation. So they're only allowed to work in that department for 4 months before another detective comes in and works, because it takes such a toll on them, on their mental health. And I thought that was so interesting. The other thing that he told me that I remember, and it didn't make it into the book, it might make it into a future book, but I remember him telling me, he told me about a particular case, which was very haunting, and it stayed with me, but he called it a rescue mission. And it was when he was going in to like save a little girl that was being trafficked. And I had never considered it as a rescue mission, especially because I had always thought through my own prejudices and biases that once someone has something happen like this, their life takes a certain path. And I think that's why I wanted to showcase Ellie, um, being able to come out of this trauma and have a full life afterward. And I believe that he influenced me in that way by calling it a rescue mission, that these victims can go on and really live full lives.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
Mm-hmm. I also spent some time, so the town of Coldwell is based on a beach town in Washington called Long Beach. I don't know if anyone's ever traveled,
Yeah.
if anyone knows the geography or anything like that, but Long Beach is a narrow strip of land off of Washington. There's one road in and one road out. And there was a big article that came out years and years ago about a tsunami like striking the West Coast and decimating all these towns. And essentially Long Beach would be underwater if that ever happened. And I really like the idea of Coldwell having this like existential threat always looming. I thought it paired well with kind of the survival theme of the book. And so I spent quite a bit of time in Long Beach, just kind of hanging out with some of the locals. I had some distant family there. And one member of the family is, he's a fisherman. And so I spent a whole day out on his tuna boat fishing. And that's where like Jimmy, the character, came from. I mean, he was, there's some direct inspiration there, like the Uncle Dan, who is the name of the fisherman that I spent time with, had lost his finger with when a piece of twine got tied around it, and he just kind of taped it up and kept fishing the rest of the day. And I mean, I had to have that for Jimmy. And so I was like, I'm really going to steal this for my character. And he was like, go ahead. But it was such a thrill to get to know him and to be out on the boat and really experience that.
I spend a lot of my 4th of July's in Long Beach. I live in
You
Portland.
do?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
you
our friends
know,
have a cabin there. Yeah. It's
yeah.
fun.
Yeah, it's
But-
an
and-
interesting sound.
I did not realize the first few times I went how susceptible it was to tsunami, like to just completely getting decimated if there was a tsunami.
I know, it's kind of terrifying. And I went out there before I had kids, and now I won't bring my kids there because
Yeah.
I'm terrified.
Yep. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Checking all the weather before you go.
Yeah.
Well, in connection with that, one of our members couldn't be here tonight, and she had a couple questions, and one of them was there any sort of research into cults, crimes against women that particularly inspired the novel? I feel like that's kind of
Yeah.
in line with what we're talking about.
Yeah, so another person that I interviewed who's a close family friend was an FBI agent, and he was at Ruby Ridge. And so some of his mannerisms and everything actually became touchstones for Chelsea, but more so for Montoya, who shows up later on in the novel. And so we talked a lot about cults and terrorism and what happened after Ruby Ridge. The other one that I was heavily influenced by was David Koresh. And they actually had a bus that was on their compound property, and that's where the inspiration for the bus being buried underground came from.
Okay. Oh, that's interesting. The other question that Renata had, well, one, was there any plans to extend the world of Detective Calhoun? So it sounds like yes, you're working on a sequel. And then she said, I found the ending surprising, especially the reappearance of Chelsea's sister and the knowledge that the police and family were entrenched in the crimes against the women. Was the ending plotted from the beginning, or did it develop over the course of the writing process?
So it was plotted from the beginning. I really wanted to, extend this idea how we it's a line from the book, how we lionize our fathers and villainize our mothers. I really wanted the crime to feel so central to Chelsea's life, and it just dovetailed nicely to have Lydia be serendipity. And that was eventually what became the revelation for Chelsea, that her father wasn't the man that she thought, he was. And it makes her able then to move on from Coldwell and move on from the house that she grew up in.
Great. That's perfect. Thank you. Does anybody else have questions?
I've got a question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, how long till we can expect the next one in this, the companion book you said?
Yeah, I'm hoping for next year. I can't tell you too much about it, but we do follow Chelsea, and it's a new city, new crime. She has a new partner. We're going to see Montoya again. I really liked writing him. He was actually a surprise for me when I was drafting, that I liked him so much, and I wanted to bring him back. I thought they had good chemistry. And I wanted to kind of explore what it would be like for Chelsea to work with a partner and to be in a bigger city. So she's moving on to Seattle, where she'll be, one of many detectives, and she'll have, more crimes to pursue. And I think it'll just be a breath of fresh air for her.
I
Nice.
like Montoya too, so that's great.
Yeah, I did. I liked him a lot. I couldn't, I was just really drawn to him when I was writing, and I kept writing him into more scenes. And so I was like, this is telling me something that I need to continue on with him. He has a story too.
Ellie, did you have any?
I had a question. I always love hearing about authors' writing processes, and you're talking about how you were planning this book out. I'm curious, does your writing process change as you're working on different genres, or do you kind of have the same style no matter what genre or type of book that you're working on?
That's a good question. I do have processes that remain throughout, regardless of genre. So I tend to start with character and the character's arc, so where I want them to go, so from beginning to end, so I know exactly what their journey is going to be. And I start by just like taking notes on my phone, and then I create an outline from that and plug in all of those notes, which I made it sound like a really short process, but it's about a year
Yes.
of doing that. Of kind of
Yeah.
like, so by the time I'm ready to outline the book, I'll usually have like 60 to 70,000 like words and notes. And then I kind of start to parse those out and create scenes. And the notes can be anything from like a setting description to dialogue, excuse me, anything like that. And then I usually work from a really concrete outline, and I don't tend to deviate from it. I know there are a lot of writers that can kind of write from the seat of their pants, but I find it much more soothing and easier to work from a pretty solid outline.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it makes sense that you would do the same thing for each, each type of story. I was just curious, like maybe like the YA novel, you just like it just takes you away and you just go with it, whereas other novels you're more scripted. So I was just curious about that. Thank you.
Well, that is, I mean, that's true to a certain extent. So like with YA romance, I mean, there are certain conventions that you want to follow with romance novels. And so that's easy, and you can be a little bit more free with it. But with a thriller, you just have to have all of your red herrings, your turns, your twists down ahead of time, because it's really, what I look at it like is that you're kind of working with like different strings, and by the end, I mean, they're all kind of spread out at the beginning of the novel, and then by the end, they all need to be braided together. And it's so complicated. I think in that regard, mystery and thrillers are some of the harder books to write.
I always say that too, because I think when you write it initially, you know what you're writing and you feel like you've kind of threaded it all together. But after that, it's not new to you. So it's kind of hard to be like, okay, did I make it too obvious? Is it not obvious enough? You know exactly how you're gonna to make it walk that fine line, which we all did talk about. We thought you did a great job, that the surprises came, but they made sense. And, so you look back and thought, oh, I would have never thought that, but that's so clever. She's been preparing us for that all along.
Yeah, it has to feel earned, I think, is
Yeah.
because if you don't make it feel earned, then the reader feels really cheated.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and then they tell you.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and we also talked about the psychiatrist some, and that was so interesting that you had her there, and clearly Ellie, she had some inkling something was going on, and she kind of was able to tell her information at just the right place. Was the psychiatrist always a part of the story?
Yeah, she was always a part of the story. And she was there more to complete, Ellie's character arc. So to see that healing process begin and give that ending, that hopeful ending that we want for her. But when you go back and if you look carefully at the novel, each of the other point of views, there's a clue dropped about what is happening with Ellie. And so in that regard, in that way, she also served a purpose too. So the psychiatrist Ellie does the really haunting drawings of the other girls on the compound. And then in Jimmy's point of view, he sees that there's a pipe down in the garage. And so if you kind of go through and look at each point of view, there's a little hint of what Ellie's ultimate, end game is going to be.
Sorry, I'm just admitting somebody really quickly.
Okay.
That made me think of another question. Oh, the other thing that we talked a fair amount about before you hopped on, because we kind of, we did a little book club talk, was how so many thrillers focus on the crime as it's happening, but you don't really read about one, like in this instance where Ellie shows up and is back from what's happened to her. And that was such an interesting perspective. Like I really enjoyed that, and it was very different than what we often read about. How did you decide to start from that perspective?
I've always been captivated by, like I said, true crime, but also in particular by stories about kidnapped victims that have returned. And so if you look at, there's some, there's some examples, like there's Elizabeth Smart and is it JC Duggard? JC Duggar? These girls that have gone missing for a period of time and then they come back. And I've always been so interested by those stories, not necessarily for the, the trauma piece. Like I don't want it to turn into like trauma porn, but more like, again, how did they survive this? I mean, there's something about the human spirit that just kept them going. And I think that's so fascinating to me.
I agree. And I just loved that it was very different. And that the reason that she was back, that was something we talked a fair amount about, like, what did we think was happening as we read? But I kept being like, what is happening? Like, why is she back? How did she get back? I just loved that because I felt like we really inhabited the story, wanting to know what was going on. And I just love that it was so different. I mean, that is a very big compliment.
Thank you.
The other thing I wanted to know, because me and covers, I was looking online ahead of time, and it looks like you've got a different title and cover in the UK.
Yes, yeah. The alternate title in the UK is called The Next Girl. And I don't think I have a copy of the cover handy, but it is much different.
Yeah.
It has it's blue, and then there's just a hint of some strands of hair, like a girl is running by. The Next Girl is a line that's taken from the novel. So there's a quote in it that Ellie says, something about, what happens to the next girl, like there's always going to be another girl. And so the team over there felt like that was a really strong title. And, titles with the word girl in them, yes, there it is, are still pretty popular too. So they decided that was better for their market.
I always find that fascinating when the title and the cover are different, because sometimes it can be a little confusing for people because they're like, wait a minute, she has 2 books coming out. So it's interesting that they decided to go with a different title. I mean, it obviously will work well there. It's just fascinating to me how those things happen.
It's always interesting to me too, what the trends are. So in the UK, I guess colors with books with neon, colors are selling more, but here it's a little bit more muted. So just different markets, different people, I guess.
Absolutely. And how about your cover, like how it came about? Did you have a role in that?
I did. It was we had an alternate cover before that was featured the Queen Anne's lace more prominently, and it looked more like a literary novel, and we were really searching for that cross between literary and commercial. And so eventually we got to this one with the silhouette of the girl that looks like she's on fire, but if you look carefully, there is the Queen Anne's lace also on the cover, which I really appreciated. I wanted that showcase because I felt like that was such a pivotal moment in the book. I love it when you can look at a cover and you don't know the cover at first, like what it's telegraphing, but then once you've read the novel, you're like, I get what this whole cover means now.
I love that. That to me is always the sign of a really good cover when I look at it afterwards and discover all these things that I didn't notice ahead of time. Like I think it's a great cover, but then I look back and I see, oh, okay, now these things tie in.
It's like a little secret between the author and the reader, it feels like.
I love that. Anybody else? I don't want to be asking. I've got all sorts of questions, but I want to make sure if people have questions they can ask.
Well, this isn't as much of a question, but I just wanted to tell you that I'm not a thriller reader, but I loved your Tokyo books. And based on the writing in those, and I knew this was a very different genre, but the writing was so excellent in those that I decided that I would read this one. And I really enjoyed the book. The violence with the girls, I got to admit, for me personally, that was hard. But I just thought this was so well written and so well told that I'm really impressed, and I will read the next ELLIE Black book, which is kind of surprising if you know me and my background. So well done, really well done.
I love it. I love that I converted you in a sense. But, the next one too, I can promise it was the violence showcasing it in the book was important to me because I think there's a quote that Chelsea says that someone has to bear witness to it, and I wanted to remain true to that for this novel. It's lighter in the second book. The second book explores different themes. It explores actually more mother-daughter relationships, things like that. And so it's not as graphic, I can tell you that. It just wasn't necessary for this second book.
Do you think, I have a friend who is a highly sensitive reader and she's a big fan of yours, but I don't think this is going to be a good fit for her. But do you think the next book would be okay for an HSP?
I think so. I mean, I would encourage you, since you know your friend so well, to read it first and help her,
Okay.
because I certainly don't want to trigger anyone. So maybe you could help her
Right.
out and be a pre-reader and then let her know if you think it'll be safe for her.
Perfect.
Valerie, did you have a question?
Sure. I'm always so curious about character names, and especially when the character name is in the title of the book. You mentioned that you had written Ellie Black a while ago. Has that always been that character's name, or did that evolve over time?
No, I didn't. Excuse me. I didn't think of this title. It was the marketing and publicity department at Simon & Schuster and my editor, in conjunction with my editor. I love the title, and when they pitched it to me, I was like, yes, that's it. But originally I was lobbying for my original title, which was If You Leave Me, which is also a song. And I thought it got more to the heart of the novel, about what happens when girls go missing and like the ambiguous loss. But they felt like that was too abstract and not commercial enough. And so they pitched The Return of Ellie Black, which I thought, was a great balance between the two, because again, it encapsulates Ellie's journey, the return, but also it can have that double meaning. Like, she's returning from being gone for 2 years, but she's also returning to herself and, getting her voice back. So I thought it was the perfect blend of both worlds.
I
Was-
also
Oh,
just
sorry.
wanted to say that I thought you did a nice job of balancing the violent pieces. The sexual piece wasn't over the top. Everything seemed to be balanced. And for somebody, I also can be a sensitive person, but I understood where everything was going and I trusted what you were doing in the book. So it brought me all the way through to the end, and I really appreciated that. It was, I thought that was very well done and very logistic.
I appreciate you trusting me with that. I know that it was hard content to write, and I know that it's hard content to read. But I thought Ellie deserved, to share her story and not to have it, washed in any way, that this was really what happened to her. She's sharing it, in her real voice. And it was important for her to say those things.
Yeah, I appreciated that. Thank you.
I do feel like there is a fair amount of gratuitous violence and abuse in stories. And I feel like in yours, what you're saying is right. Like, she needed to tell her story. That's what would have happened in the real world, and it needed to be told. And I appreciated that, because at least it made sense in your story, I thought, to understand that, versus sometimes I'm like, why is this so incredibly violent? It doesn't seem to always serve a purpose.
And if you think about it, I mean, there are those moments, and they probably stick out more than others, but I hope the focus of Ellie's story is more on, her friendships, and again, her survival, her strength, her dignity, and you can see her being able to come back again and live a very full life through the help of like her therapist and her parents. And she's going to be able to, rebuild.
Well,
I
oh,
think
sorry.
you achieved all that. I
Yes,
really do. I 100%. Yeah.
but also just focusing a little bit on her PTSD and sort of what happens when somebody returns and what that's like for them. And we were talking about this ahead too, that you're so happy they're, you know, her parents are so happy she's back, but she's not totally back herself. You know what I mean? Like
Mm.
she's changed and kind of portraying some of that. And I thought that was very useful too.
You know, whenever there's, you know, a traumatic experience, people are fundamentally changed.
Right.
And it's important to recognize that. You know, some of Ellie's trauma journey was derived from my own. When I had kids, I had a very traumatic birth, and then my daughter had a pretty severe febrile seizure when she was just turning 3. She was on the cusp of her 3rd birthday, and she had to be intubated, and there was lots of really, really terrifying things. And I channeled some of that into this book, first of all, through like just that thought about like losing a child. So into Kat's perspective, like what it means to be a mother, and, you know, think about losing your child. I mean, it's horrifying. And then the PTSD that I had afterward, and the counseling that I had to go through. So there's a scene in Ellie Black where she does the, you know, the therapy where it's like the grounding work, and I had to do that with a counselor too. But these are all things that, you know, can be used across the board for people that have suffered, you know, trauma. And it was really rewarding to me, because I thought that I would have to live with like this memory of my daughter having a seizure forever, and that I would always be reliving it. But it was so rewarding to me to come, you know, to the end of that therapy and know that I didn't have to stay stuck in that moment for a lifetime. And you know, I paralleled Ellie's journey to that too, that she sees that she doesn't have to be stuck on the compound, that she doesn't have to leave a part of herself behind, that she can get that back.
Well, first, I'm sorry about your daughter. That had to be horrifying, but that is nice that you were able to channel some of that into the book.
I find writing to be so fulfilling and so cathartic and so healing. And I can imagine, I already have a novel that's kind of plotted, and there's like a scene, you know, a seizure scene. And I find it to be just, you know, it's like the best and worst thing that I can do writing all this stuff. But yeah, thank you. I appreciate you saying that.
Well, so you kind of led me to my next question, because I was going to ask you after the next Detective Calhoun book. Sorry, I couldn't get all that out. You are going to be writing another novel, or have you decided which genre, like what you're going to do then?
Yeah, so I have a young adult novel that I've already written, and that should come out in the next probably year or two. And it's another YA like rom-com called Love Me Tomorrow. And it's about a girl that doesn't believe in love after her parents divorced. And again, my parents divorced when I was young, so that's me unpacking things. And she starts to receive love letters from her future true love, and she kind of has to parse out who that person is. So that's up next. That's already written. And then I'm hoping this summer to start writing my next women's fiction novel, for lack of a better term. So what would be kind of the follow-up to Mika, although it doesn't have Mika or any of the characters, but it would be in that same kind of, you know, context. And it's about 2 women that are neighbors but also enemies, and how they become friends. I really wanted to, I read this article, I think it was in the Atlantic, and it was talking about how lonely American families have become. And I kind of wanted to explore that. I also wanted to explore, again, there's more trauma in it. My partner's had his dad suffered a severe aneurysm when he was younger. And so I kind of want to explore too what it means to be like a woman and taking care of your companion after that happens, because I'm so inspired by my partner's mom and how she carried on after that. So I have all these kind of pieces. I haven't quite jigsawed them together, but I think it'll be a cross between kind of Mika and The Return of Ellie Black, in the sense that it's going to be a domestic mystery. So there's going to be something that happened, and we're going to be solving something, but it'll be a little bit lighter, like in the vein of like Liane Moriarty. I don't know if I pronounced her name right, but kind of that, like the husband's secret, like we're kind of trying to unravel what's happening in these people's lives.
Oh, that sounds great. That's awesome that you
Yeah.
have so much coming up.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's just finding the time. Since I had kids, it's your time is not always your own.
Yes, definitely, definitely. I have one last question, but before I do that, does anybody else have any questions? I don't want to cut anybody off and make sure everybody got to ask what they wanted to ask.
I just have
I,
one.
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just had one quick question. First of all, I really loved the book and I was so excited that you went in this genre, even though of course loved your other books too, but I love to read thrillers and so I was very excited you switched genres. I have a question about, I know you like to write about mother-daughter relationships. And so I was curious in this book, when Ellie kind of, I don't know why the young girl's name is escaping me. I'm sorry. But when Ellie kind of takes her under her wing and she sort of in a way feels like she's her mother. And I was just curious how you kind of came up with that idea and if it was like a different way to kind of write it and or was it kind of like I needed a hook to, for her to have an incentive to come back in a way or to do this thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I always intended for Ellie to go back to the compound. And so Grace was always built into to the fabric of the novel. I knew that I wanted David to escalate because that's kind of how these men work as they start, they kind of start when you look at like the trajectory of these men that hold women captive, they kind of start with smaller crimes. And so like peeping toms, and then they kind of escalate from there. And so I always knew that he would continue to escalate and unravel at the same time. So based on what was happening with his mom and, in the real world, he was, taking women. And he wasn't happy, with what the girls were doing on the compound. And so he thought that someone younger would help him, fulfill what he wanted to be done. And so, yeah, she was always baked into the fabric of the novel. And I think it also, too, there's a lot of commentary about what victims get press and attention. And, these teenage girls are kind of stuck in limbo, especially if they're poor or if they're of color. But when a child is taken, there's a little bit more attention, given to that, even though I feel like there's a problem in our world where we cast teenage girls as adults, and they're not. They're children too. And, they're still innocent and they still deserve to be found and sought after. And so I also like that juxtaposition of who gets attention and when.
Cynthia, did you have a question?
Just wanted to say thriller is not my genre. Loved this book. It was so good. I haven't read any of your other stuff. I couldn't put it down. It was a Saturday and I was like, nothing else got done. I just loved it so much.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's always just like the best compliment to hear when someone can't put your work down. That was one of the goals in drafting the novel was, I wanted to tackle these heavier themes, but I also wanted to write something that was pacey and thrilling and that really gripped you from the start. And so that's a huge compliment. I appreciate it. Thank you.
I kept getting that feedback from reader after reader. So people are like, this book is so good. So it always makes me happy too, because I'm like, okay, good. So last question, unless anybody else has another question. No. What have you read lately or what's on your nightstand?
Oh gosh, I just finished, I haven't done that much reading because I've been doing some traveling and then my kids were sick for like 2 weeks with the plague. But I finished Annie Bot. Have any of you heard of that?
I've heard of it, but I haven't read it.
Yeah, so it's considered an AI book, but it's also very feminist, and so it kind of talks about, what it means to be a woman in the world. And I read that I think in like 2 days. I couldn't stop reading it. I thought it was so clever and it was so juicy, like just in the sense of like it's about this woman who's a artificial intelligence and she's a robot, and she's assigned to be like the housemate to a man. And I just thought it was so fascinating, and also kind of talks about what it means to be human. And it didn't go in the direction that I thought it was going to go, which I found really refreshing, because typically if you like watch any sort of AI story, you kind of have these expectations of what the AI is going to do, but it didn't go in that direction. I found that really refreshing.
Well,
I
that's what
also, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just that's what we were saying about your book, was that, you know, you have expectations for thrillers and missing girls and what's going to happen. And we love that it went in a totally different direction. I mean, that's always so much fun, I think.
Yeah, it's kind of neat. It's so nice when authors, I mean, I'm not tooting my own horn here, I'm talking about any, but when they're able to kind of just take something that feels really familiar, but then it also feels different too. And so there you can find that comfort in that this feels like a familiar story, but then it's different and it feels new and fresh. The other book that I just started reading, and I don't know if it's on your radar, is The Ministry of Time by Kaylee Ann Bradley.
Yes,
Yeah.
I have not read it yet, but I
Okay.
really want to. I've been hearing such good things.
It's very clever. It's funny. It's just an enjoyable read. And it's science fiction, so it's about the British government creating these bridges and people from the past coming into the future. But it's not science fiction heavy, because that was also kind of, I was like, I'm not sure if I'm not a science fiction gal. That's one genre that I don't usually read too much of, but it's not too science fiction heavy. It's quite lovely, actually.
Okay, good. It's got a great cover too.
Yeah.
It always grabs me when they have something clever and different.
Yeah.
Good. Well, thank you so much. This was wonderful. Good luck with your book. I know I've been seeing, you know, glowing reviews everywhere, but it'll be fun to see it make its way out into the world.
Thank you so much. And thank you for being early readers. This is the first, this is the kickoff to all of the publicity stuff for me and everything. And what a great way to kick off everything. You guys are such great readers. And I appreciate you, Cindy, and I appreciate all of you reading and wanting to talk about the book. It's always so humbling for me. It's a really incredible honor to be able to talk to you guys. So,
well, I'm very glad you're back. It's fun that we've been doing this long enough that we're starting to have repeat authors. So it's really fun. And I love looking forward to what you're doing with this one, and then seeing the future stuff too.
hey, thank you.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.